Hi, Ron from Clarity. In today's video, we're going to talk about protecting PHI data. And we're going to give you 5 key foolproof methods to help ensure that you protect PHI data, which helps maintain your HIPAA compliance. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So the first one we're going to talk about is to deploy strict role-based permissions for your staff. In looking at the HHS Gov site and reading through the historical breaches over the last 5 years, for 5 years running, the number one cause or penalties assessed was for giving unauthorized staff access to data they should not have access to. The example I always give is if I broke my arm and ended up at the ER, the technician, the radiology technician that's going to be doing my x-ray should be able to upload, read my x-ray, put notes in there, but they shouldn't be able to go into other areas of my record which might have a diagnosis of, say, I don't know, type 2 diabetes or whatever. It's none of their business. They don't have access to that. Where people make mistakes a lot is they have everybody in their staff have a login to their EMR. And so you've got receptionists and other people that are just making appointments, but have access to full information about everybody's health, their diagnosis, medications they're on, and things that is just, frankly, has nothing to do with their business or the level of healthcare that they provide. That's kind of the guideline is the data they have access to is data they need to provide the services that role provides. That's why I was saying the x-ray technician doesn't need to know if I have type 2 diabetes. I think the only thing they need, and they always ask the question, for the women, are you pregnant? Right? Because the x-ray, right? Second, log every transaction with patient data. There can be, and the example I like to give here is, let's say I had, my best friend was a doctor and I had type 2 diabetes and it progressed into type 1 insulin dependent diabetes, right? And so he called me in and said, hey, listen, you've got type 1 diabetes, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, dude, I don't have health insurance outlined yet. You can't put that in my record. So he goes back and backs it out and puts me as back to type 2. And he says, well, I'll have to do this next month, so make sure to hurry and go get a plan. So I go get a plan, and then he changes it back. Well, 6 months later, I pass away from complications of diabetes. They can subpoena those records, and they can see that my buddy Dr. Bob went in and before I got my insurance, changed it from type 2 to type 1, and then went back and changed it back. Those have to be tracked. So anytime there is access to individual patient PHI data, especially if it's editable, you need to track that, record that in separate, secure, encrypted user level logs. So you have the old value and the new value because they can be subpoenaed for insurance fraud. Number 3, up to multi-factor authentication on all administrative access to any UIs. Just improve your security across the board. We want to make sure that those that shouldn't have access don't. Anytime somebody uses an easily guessable password, which we know many people do, as they've been there for a long time, they may not have policies where they have to change and update their password every year. They may not have complex passwords. So they've got some simple passwords. Well, if you enable multi-factor authentication, even if a simple password happens to be guessed, it's going to have to send an email or a text to the phone of the person, and they'll know somebody's trying to get in. They won't let them in. They'll go change their password. So make sure to enforce multi-factor authentication for all administrative access to any UIs. Number 3, make sure all data is encrypted at rest. Now that's pretty straightforward, but for all HIPAA platforms, you either have to tokenize the data if your platform doesn't fully follow the HIPAA guidelines, or the platform needs to be fully HIPAA compliant, which means that all of the data, both in transit and at rest, stored on the disk, is all encrypted. The other thing you can do is those encryption keys can be rotated, right? So you can use AES 256, but then you can protect those encryption keys and you can rotate them out and update them to help mitigate that risk. So if you have a disgruntled employee that takes one of the old keys, they're in IT, they know what they're doing, they take a copy of the PHI data and the old key, if we've rotated those keys out, they won't be able to decrypt that data and do something malicious with that PHI data. So encrypt data at rest, pretty much a given, but rotating out the keys and ensuring the latest and greatest encryption, not necessarily common. That's another way to help improve the security. And the final one is to validate the third-party plugins for compliance risk. You don't want to introduce any vulnerabilities into your EMR, your EHR, your platform, your doctor-patient portals. So a lot of times what will happen is people will go in and say, oh, we're going to add a blog to this website. Well, that website is also the patient portal. And so the next thing you know, they add a plugin that may have a vulnerability into the database for access. And if that database contains any PHI data, they may have introduced a vulnerability they don't even know about. So make sure to have a development environment. Make sure to have a good HIPAA partner like a Clarity Ventures that can do research, that has done hundreds of these portals, that knows how to do penetration testing, that can do the research for you to ensure that these new plugins, these new features and capabilities that you're introducing into your portals or your platforms are not going to bring with them any security risks. So that's the 5. So to quickly review, number 1, make sure to deploy a strict role-based permissions for all staff. Number 2, log every transaction in an encrypted user-level log that deals especially with PHI or editing individual patient PHI records. Number 3, enforce multi-factor authentication for all administrative UI access. Number 4, ensure that all of your PHI data at rest is encrypted and protected and you rotate your keys. And finally, validate your third-party plugins for any vulnerabilities or compliance risks they may introduce into the system. So that's it for today. We'll catch you in the next one.